Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the cloud-draped realm of Greek mythology to find out why at one particularly petty and immortal moment in ancient storytelling, the goddess Hera decided it was a good idea to turn a woman into a cow and then posted a hundred-eyed giant to watch her graze. You know, for security purposes. You start in Olympus, it's golden. Yes, but more family feud with columns than heavenly paradise. Imagine a celestial HOA meeting where everyone's immortal and slightly passive-aggressive. Hera sits on her throne, perfectly composed robes more starched than sense would dictate, and eyes narrowed just enough to make even Zeus shift nervously. Now, fair warning. If you think you'd survive as a mortal wandering through this myth blessed with your modern sense of boundaries and Wi-Fi dependency, well, you probably wouldn't. Most Greek mortals barely made it to lunch without a curse or accidental transformation. And Io was just a priestess trying to do her job. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're joining from a cozy bed somewhere across the world, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the marble steps of Olympus, sandals sticking just slightly because no one ever talks about the humidity above the clouds. You peek into the main hall of the gods, and wow, it's tense. Hera sits poised every inch the divine matriarch. Her crown catches the glow of the eternal torches. She's beautiful in that dangerous way, like an expensive vase on a wobbly table. You might think being married to Zeus, the sky-throwing, thunder-loving king of the gods, would come with perks. And sure, there's immortality Olympus, real estate, and access to the nectar cooler. But it also means constant vigilance because Zeus has the impulse control of a golden retriever in a squirrel park. Right now, he's pretending to read a scroll. Hera knows. She always knows. See, in mythic times, mortals weren't just mortals. They were potential chess pieces, pawns, distractions, occasionally side quests for gods with too much time and not enough therapy. Io was one of those mortals, specifically a priestess of Hera herself. That's the mythical equivalent of working the front desk at Hera's temple and still somehow ending up in Zeus's search history. Historians still argue whether priestesses like Io held actual power or mostly ceremonial roles, but the records agree temple priestesses were supposed to be off-limits. Emphasis on supposed to be. Zeus naturally didn't care. It started as these stories usually do, with Zeus seeing Io and thinking yes, and from there things got weirder than a toga party hosted by centaurs. You're not sure if it was her eyes, her devotion, or the way she didn't scream when lightning crackled nearby. But Io caught Zeus's wandering attention. And once that happened, well, let's just say things escalated. Fast. Zeus, for reasons even he couldn't probably articulate, didn't simply say hello. That would be too mortal. Instead, he opted for one of his classic moves, seduction via transformation. He'd already tried swans, bulls, golden rain because apparently normal flirting was out of fashion on Olympus. What he tried with Io is a little foggier pun, very much intended. You see, to hide the tryst from Hera, Zeus did what any panicked god with a guilty conscience might do. He conjured a storm, a thick, swirling cloud mass that hovered over the entire region like a suspiciously dramatic weather balloon. Hera, goddess of marriage and queen of asking questions. No one wanted to answer, looked up at the sky and thought, interesting. And when Hera thought something was interesting, you could bet the next hour would involve someone regretting everything. The thing about clouds, especially magical ones, is that they're very conspicuous. Local shepherds started pointing, birds rerouted, even the satyrs kept a safe distance. So Hera descended, softly, gracefully, with that smile that says, I already know you're lying. She approached Zeus, still awkwardly standing in the middle of his own thundercloud, and tilted her head. Oh, she said, all honey and daggers, such peculiar weather today. Zeus, visibly sweating despite being immune to most forms of heat, chuckled. Seasonal. very seasonal. That's when Hera spotted the cow. A very specific cow. One with big, wide, slightly guilty eyes, and the air of someone who used to be a person with errands. Io in bovine form was standing suspiciously close to Zeus. Hera blinked. A long, slow blink. "Darling," she said, "may I have that cow?" Zeus froze. There are many forms of divine torture, and one of them is being asked a direct question by someone who already knows the answer. But Zeus couldn't say no, not without looking very suspicious. "Of course," he replied, voice cracking only slightly. "Take the cow." And just like that, Io the cow became Hera's new pet. Historians still argue whether this entire myth is a metaphor for temple politics, the fragility of power dynamics, or simply a story the ancients told to explain why cows look so perpetually concerned. Whatever the reason, one thing is clear. Hera had her cow, and she wasn't about to let anyone near it. You wake the next morning to the soft clink of bronze bells and the low moo of a cow that is definitely not just a cow. Io, formerly a respected priestess of Hera, and now a four-legged grass connoisseur, grazes near the edge of a hillside under Hera's ever-watchful eye. The Queen of Olympus stands nearby, her expression unreadable, arms folded like someone overseeing a particularly stubborn topiary. And Zeus has vanished. Typical. You're starting to get the hang of divine politics. Step 1, make a terrible decision. Step 2, transform someone into a mammal. Step 3, vanish and let your wife clean up the metaphysical mess. But Hera's not really interested in redemption arcs. She's interested in containment. See, mortals turned into animals usually don't stay put. They wander, move dramatically, accidentally start cults. Hera knew this, so she needed a way to keep Io secure under surveillance, preferably with a touch of passive aggression. Enter the security upgrade. But first, Io's new reality. You follow her across the olive-dotted hills of Argos. She's a cow, yes, but she still thinks in human patterns. She looks at temples and feels something tug inside her, recognition loss, the faint desire to light incense. Occasionally, she attempts to speak, but it only comes out as distressed bovine grunts. It's the mythological equivalent of texting with mittens on. Villagers whisper when they see her. Some bow, others leave offerings. One farmer mistakes her for a divine omen and dedicates his entire barley harvest to her hooves. Spoiler, this doesn't end well for his winter rations. And through it all, Hera watches. Not always directly, but the way a cat watches a particularly shifty bird. This is where it gets interesting. Hera doesn't just pen Io up and forget her. No, she's far too theatrical for that. She commissions a guard, someone who doesn't blink, literally. His name is Argus Panoptus. You've probably heard of him, the 100-eyed giant. And yes, he really does have 100 eyes, scattered over his body like celestial polka dots. Historians still argue whether ancient poets meant that literally or metaphorically, whether Argus was simply very observant or genuinely multi-eyed, like a mythological peacock who got tenure. Either way, Hera trusts him. Argus doesn't sleep like regular folks. When some of his eyes rest, others stay open, rotating in shifts like little celestial security cameras. He doesn't eat much, doesn't talk much, and carries a club for dramatic effect. He's exactly the kind of overkill Hera adores. You first meet Argus at twilight, standing motionless beneath a cypress tree. The wind doesn't move him. Bugs avoid him. Birds land near him and immediately regret it. And beside him, Io, chewing grass. With flair. It's a strange tableau, the paranoid goddess, the miserable cow, and the sleepless sentinel. And you can't help but wonder why all this? Why go through the trouble? Why not just smite Zeus, uncow the girl, and call it a day? Because, dear listener, this isn't about the cow. It's about principle. See, Hera's not simply jealous. She's strategic. She doesn't rage blindly. She rearranges the board. Io may be the innocent one here, but she's also the piece Zeus tried to hide. And now Hera's made her visible. Extremely. Turned her into a lesson. Placed her under the all-seeing eye, of Argus, as a reminder. You try to trick Hera, and your mistress ends up grazing under a pine tree guarded by a walking eyeball quilt. Petty, yes. Effective, also yes. There's another layer here too. Greek society often reflected these myths as metaphors for real-world tensions, power versus vulnerability. Womanhood constrained by divine male authority and punishment dressed up as divine justice. Io's transformation, surveillance, and exile could be seen as a mythic mirror of how agency was stripped away in both divine and mortal worlds. But for now, you just watch. The sun sets. Argus remains still. Io sighs. One of her ears twitches dramatically. Somewhere, Zeus sulks behind a thundercloud. This routine continues for days, weeks. Argus never blinks. Io never escapes. You begin to suspect even the local shepherds are starting to feel awkward about it. One night, as stars dot the sky like lazy breadcrumbs, Hera descends again. You hear the familiar rustle of divine fabrics, the scent of impossibly expensive sandalwood, and the soft jangle of power. She doesn't approach Io. She approaches Argus. "You're doing well," she murmurs. "Keep her close. Let nothing distract you." Argus nods. 17 eyes blink in sequence. 2 others check the horizon. The rest remain fixed on Io. And Hera, satisfied, vanishes back into whatever glittering council meeting or smiting session she had scheduled. But you linger. You start to notice something peculiar. Every night, Io moos a little louder. Not panicked, just increasingly opinionated. She paces, tries to write something in the dirt with her hoof. It looks vaguely like the Greek letter alpha, or possibly a cow's impression of a shopping list. Either way, she's trying. You get the sense she remembers everything. And she's waiting for help, for change, for someone less enthusiastic about surveillance and more about sympathy. That someone, he's coming, and he's bringing a flute. But that's a story for tomorrow. You wake just before dawn, and Argus is already watching. Well, some of him is. A dozen or so eyes scan the hills. Another 10 focus on a bee doing questionable things to a fig blossom. A few seem to be power napping. But even when Argus rests, Argus watches. You shift your gaze to Io. She's not grazing anymore. She's pacing 4 clunky hooves tail. Twitching eyes, darting in every direction like she's trying to remember where she put her life before it all went bovine. Every once in a while, she lets out a low, drawn-out moo. It's not particularly tragic. It's more like the sound someone makes when they realize they've been on hold with customer service for 3 days and the music loop just restarted. The whole situation feels stagnant, which for a myth is dangerous. You can only imprison a character for so long before someone starts plotting a jailbreak. Enter Hermes, the god's official messenger, trickster, mischief enthusiast, and most importantly, the only deity with the official job description will perform rescues, riddles, and deliveries for immortal clients. Zeus calls him in. You don't see the conversation. Zeus prefers dramatic monologues delivered to lightning bolts, but you feel the result. A ripple in the wind, a sudden giggle in the laurel trees, and then Hermes steps into the meadow looking like he just stepped off an ancient runway. Winged sandals, check. Caduceus staff, check. Slightly smug expression, like he knows what's going to happen 3 chapters from now. Absolutely. He sizes up the situation instantly. Cow, giant, eyes, vibe of lingering resentment. You get the sense he's done this kind of thing before. Hermes doesn't rush. He approaches slowly like a bard arriving late to his own performance. He sits beneath a tree, pulls out a flute, and begins to play. Historians still argue whether the flute Hermes used was Panpipe's aulos or some lost-to-history invention involving sheep guts and divine confidence. But every version of the myth agrees the music worked. You watch Argus shift. 3 eyes blink, then 5. Hermes doesn't stop. The tune isn't flashy. It meanders. Wanders up and down like a lazy river with a good sense of humor. It's the kind of music you don't realize is hypnotizing you until you're drooling into your own toga. Argus listens. Eyes begin to droop. Hermes adds a story, something about a turtle who became a liar, or maybe it was a liar that turned into a turtle. The details are fuzzy, but that's the point. Argus leans forward. One by one, his eyes blink and stay shut. Hermes slows the tempo. His voice lowers. Io stops pacing. She knows something is happening. You do too. Hermes lets the final note drift off into the breeze like a leaf with perfect timing. Argus, still upright, begins to snore. All 100 eyes at last closed. It's a rare moment in Greek mythology, a nap that matters. Hermes nods once and draws his blade. Now don't panic. Greek myths are dramatic, but this part is mercifully quick. Hermes, smooth as ever, does what he came to do. He frees Io. Quietly. Efficiently. No fanfare. Just the soft sound of hooves shifting and 100 eyes never opening again. Argus slips away, not violently but gently, like someone closing down a security firm because the client finally changed the locks. You stand in silence. Even the birds seem surprised. Io takes one step, then another. She's still a cow, but something's changed. Her posture is straighter, her eyes clearer. She no longer looks trapped. She looks patient. Hermes turns to her and mutters something, probably divine instructions involving how not to get turned back into a cow during the return journey. You know, standard fare. He vanishes the way he came, with style. And just like that, the balance tips. The story changes course. You might be wondering, though, how did Hera take it? Badly, obviously. Hera always took things very personally. But here's the twist. Instead of raging or raining fire, she gets artistic. You see, she loved Argus. Not romantically, more like someone loves a favorite intern who actually read the manual. She felt he deserved more than just a funeral pyre or an offhand mention in a bard's tavern tune. So she honored him the way only a goddess could, by taking all 100 of his eyes and placing them on the tail of her favorite bird, the peacock. And if you've ever looked closely at a peacock's tail, those ornate, shimmering eye patterns, you've now got the origin story. A sleep-deprived cow, a flute solo, a 100-eyed bodyguard, and a fashion tribute. Historians still argue whether this tale served to elevate the bird or simply Hera's brand of majestic vengeance. Either way, the symbolism stuck. The peacock became Hera's sacred animal, elegant, watchful, and just a little extra. Back in the meadow, Io walks in slow circles as if relearning her hooves. She doesn't know where she's going yet, only that she's not standing still anymore. And somewhere in Olympus, Hera smooths the feathers of her newly decorated bird and murmurs, "Fine, let's see what happens next." You follow Io. She walks slowly, like someone easing into a body that doesn't quite fit, but still she walks. Through olive groves and half-forgotten temples, past startled shepherds and awestruck goats. Wherever she goes, people stare. You'd think seeing a cow with this much confidence would be comical, but no. Io carries something more than cud-chewing poise. There's a hum around her now, like the story knows it's shifting. She's free. Well, mostly. She's still a cow, still hoofed, still swatting flies with a tail that has clearly had enough, and still without the luxury of speech, which, if you ask her, is the real injustice. And Hera? Oh, she's not finished. Because you see, for Hera, freedom isn't the same thing as forgiveness. If Hera can't watch Io anymore, she can still haunt her. A little reminder buzzing in her ear, literally. That's where the gadfly comes in. Small, vicious, relentless. According to the myth, Hera sends a supernatural gadfly to torment Io, to bite, to buzz, to chase her across continents with the kind of dedication most relationships only dream of. Historians still argue whether this gadfly was symbolic of guilt, divine punishment, or simply another version of a cosmic ankle bracelet. But whatever it was, Io felt it. Often, you hear it before she does. That thin, high-pitched whine just above your right ear, the kind of sound that makes your skin crawl before your brain even processes it. Io flinches, then runs. She doesn't think she just moves through underbrush, over rivers, down sharp paths, and up stony hills. The gadfly follows, nipping, darting, always just close enough to be maddening. It's less flight of the Valkyries and more stampede of one very annoyed divine bovine. And yet this too becomes a story. People see the frantic cow and begin weaving tales. They call her cursed, or blessed, or part of a ritual no one remembers the rules to. Farmers leave out bowls of milk. Children draw her into their clay pots wide-eyed and mid-moo. Io's pain becomes myth before it even finishes being a memory. You follow her to the edge of the Ionian Sea. That name Ionian might ring a bell. Yes, it's from this Io. Her footsteps left enough mythic breadcrumbs that entire coastlines took her name. She's running along the edge now, hooves slipping on salt-slicked rock gadfly still in pursuit. You catch your breath. She doesn't. She plunges into the water and swims. You'd think a cow wouldn't be graceful in the sea, but Io defies expectations. She cuts through the waves with a strange sort of elegance, like a creature remembering it once belonged to another shape, another story. Sailors on passing ships stare. One drops his olive pit. Another scribbles furiously on a scrap of parchment later to become a wildly inaccurate sea chart with notes like, "Here, cow Nereid." She makes landfall, keeps running, through Thrace, through the lands of the Scythians into strange territories where her name hasn't reached yet, but soon will. The gadfly never stops, but neither does Io. This isn't just a chase anymore. It's a transformation. Not physical, at least not yet, but internal. You see it in the way she moves now. Less frantic, more purposeful. She's not just escaping, she's becoming. Along the way, she meets strangers. Some offer shelter. Some bow and weep. One prophet, half mad and buried up to his knees in river mud, calls her the mooing oracle and tries to read her tail twitches. Io doesn't stop. But she listens. You reach the shores of a new sea. Here in this half-mapped land, she pauses. The gadfly hovers. Io stares at the water. Then quietly she moos. Not loudly, just enough. And you hear it. A shift in the wind, a ripple in the grass. Something in the myth has noticed. Because even though she's still a cow, even though the gadfly still bites and Hera still watches, Io has crossed into something sacred. Persistence. No one remembers the exact spot where Io first rested. Some say it was near Byzantium. Others place it farther east, but wherever it was, a temple eventually rose in her honor, dedicated not to her pain but to her journey. A reminder that divine punishment might chase you, but you can still name the coast after yourself, and that's not nothing. You watch Io sleep beneath a fig tree. The gadfly settles in a nearby bush, unusually quiet for the night. And for the first time in days, the stars look down on a creature who, against myth odds and petty divine surveillance, has refused to give in. And somewhere far above, Hera narrows her eyes, but doesn't interfere. Not yet, because the next part of the story isn't hers. It belongs to a cow. And to what happens when you just keep going. You wake to find Io already on the move. It's early, just enough light to make shadows out of tree trunks, just enough warmth to remind you that mythological cows don't have time for leisurely breakfasts. She trudges up a slope, hooves clinking faintly on scattered stones. The air smells different here, dry, sharp. The trees are sparse, squat things clinging to the hills like they've heard enough stories to be cautious. And the gadfly, buzzing, always buzzing, like a nagging thought you can't quite swat away. Io flinches, moose once, keeps moving. You follow as she winds through narrow paths toward the eastern horizon. There's a current to her motion now. Less random, more determined, as if something or someone is calling. The land changes. She enters Phrygia, where the earth has a kind of cinnamon red tinge, and the rivers sound more opinionated than helpful. Io wades across one and accidentally inspires a local farmer to claim he saw the goddess of the harvest bathing in divine milk. This becomes a holiday for 3 years. Meanwhile, Io is still a cow. She stops at a grove sacred to Rhea, mother of the Olympians. The silence there is different. It's thick, heavy, like someone whispered the same word over and over until the trees started to remember it. She tries to rest. The gadfly says no. With one bite, it sends her crashing through undergrowth and into a thicket of wild thyme and curses muttered by exhausted nymphs. The nymphs scatter one, throws a pine cone. Io apologizes through increasingly tragic moos, and she runs again. Historians still argue whether this part of the myth, Io's relentless eastward movement, reflects actual ancient trade routes or was simply a convenient way for storytellers to explain why a sacred cow might be spotted in Asia Minor. Either way, the result is the same. Io becomes a map, her hooves right across continents. Every region she passes collects a fragment of her story. A statue here, a name there, a shrine built where she once sneezed. People forget her origins but keep the symbols: crescent horns, restless eyes, the idea that sometimes a cow isn't just a cow. At one point, Io stumbles into a camp of Thracian women mid-ritual. They think she's a blessing from Artemis. One of them ties a garland of laurel around her neck. Io stands awkwardly while they chant. She looks mildly honored and deeply confused. Later, she eats the garland. A day later, you reach the river Halys. It's wide, slow, smells like old bronze and arguments. A river god rises. Yes, rises from the water itself. He's got the vague shape of a man and the definite smell of algae. His beard drips cattails. His eyes swirl like eddies. He sees Io and sighs. "Oh, not another one," he mutters, rubbing his forehead with a splashy hand. Apparently, this is not the first time a cursed mortal has tried to cross his jurisdiction. You sit beside the river as he lectures no one in particular. Something about divine boundaries, the lack of proper paperwork, and how Zeus never cleans up after himself. Io just blinks, swats her tail. She's heard worse. Eventually, he lets her pass, but not before muttering, "You'll find nothing east but prophecy and sand. And even those don't come cheap." You thank him anyway. Io moves on. Past strange mountains where goats sing at sunrise. Through valleys where old women whisper her name but don't know why. At one point, she passes a tree said to weep when truth is near. It stays dry. She moves faster. Then comes the detour. You reach Dodona, a place of oracles, of rustling oaks and a prophetic wind. Priests there don't speak, they listen. To leaves, to creeks, to the language of groaning bark. They gather when Io arrives. They don't bow. They don't offer food. Instead, they sit and wait. And in the hush between the gadfly's buzzes, a breeze moves through the trees. The leaves murmur. The priests lean in, then nod, and speak together as one. She must go south, across the sea. There she will find the end of the buzzing. Io stars, then moos, then stares again. You're not sure if she understood, but she turns and begins heading south. The priests go back to listening. The leaves go back to whispering. And the wind, just for a moment, sounds like laughter. You catch up to her as the sun lowers behind you. Io's tired. You can see it in her stride, in the way her ears droop, in the way she stares longingly at a patch of particularly lush grass but doesn't stop. You wonder if she remembers what it's like to be human, or if the cow has taken over. But then she passes a pool of still water, and you watch as she pauses, looks, sees her reflection, and moves not in distress but in recognition. She knows, and that might be the most human thing of all. You wake to ocean spray, the salty kind that stings the air but smells like freedom. Io stands at the edge of a cliff overlooking the Aegean. Below her, waves churn against jagged rocks like they're trying to remember an old rhythm. Above her, gulls cry the same complaint they've been shouting since the Bronze Age. She doesn't flinch. She's staring across the sea towards something she can't name but must reach. Behind her, the land she's crossed fades into haze. Mountains, valleys, rivers that yelled at her gone or folded neatly behind memory. She's come so far that the gadfly's buzzing now sounds less like torment and more like punctuation. Annoying, yes, but familiar. Predictable. She takes a breath, steps back, and plunges. The sea roars up to meet her. Salt water swirls. Her hooves churn foam. It's ungainly, like trying to do synchronized swimming in a body made for grazing, but Io persists. You swim alongside her, pushing through the current, heart pounding like a misplaced war drum. And then just like that, you cross the narrow strait between Asia and Europe. Today we call it the Bosporus. Back then, people had a simpler name, the Cow's Crossing, because of her. Yes, really. Io, the divine cow, the reluctant sea skipper, the mooing oracle of geography is the reason this famous stretch of water got its name. Historians still argue whether the name was literal or a poetic flourish retrofitted into myth. But the legend held, and the Bosporus became one of the many things Io inadvertently left behind. You crawl ashore with her dripping and gasping. On this new continent, the landscape feels different, broader, brighter, less like a punishment and more like a possibility. The air smells of cumin and baked clay. The wind carries strange stories from far-off cities where pyramids pierce the sky. She rests. You do too. The gadfly does not. Buzz, nip, hover. Io lets out a low moo that somehow sounds like an eye roll. You're beginning to suspect she's developing sarcasm. Travelers begin to spot her. They speak a dialect you barely recognize, but they point, whisper, and begin to follow, not with fear but reverence. You watch the myth grow again. It grows faster this time. Here in Egypt, the people are used to strange arrivals, sun gods with falcon heads, queens who speak with crocodiles. The sudden appearance of a sacred cow barely causes a stir. They watch her enter and someone says, Hathor. You freeze. Hathor, the goddess of motherhood music, and you guessed it, cows. You realize something. Io isn't just a traveler anymore. She's a symbol, or maybe a reincarnation, or a placeholder. Honestly, at this point in ancient mythology, the lines blur faster than wine at a symposium. But she's welcomed, anointed, decorated. They garland her with papyrus, paint her horns gold. One priestess murmurs prayers into her ear while another carves her likeness into a stone wall with impressive speed. Io just stands there, startled, honored, still swatting at that gadfly. And then it happens. Not loudly, not dramatically. One moment she's chewing on a lotus leaf. The next, she's standing on 2 feet. Legs wobbly but human. Flesh, skin, hands. Io blinks, feels her own face. Coughs once, probably because a bug flew in. And then laughs. She can laugh. She can speak. You're not sure what she says. Maybe it's a prayer. Maybe it's something unprintable. But the look on her face is unmistakable. She's back, and the people cheer. There's music, drums, flutes. Someone drops a tray of figs in excitement. It's chaotic and joyful in that beautiful early civilization kind of way. And the gadfly, gone. Just like that. Vanished. Maybe Hera finally grew bored. Maybe Zeus got around to submitting the correct divine paperwork. Or maybe, just maybe, the story decided it was time to change shape. Whatever the reason, Io is free, and whole, and worshipped. The Egyptians don't ask questions. They build a temple in her honor. Call her Isis in some circles, Hathor in others. Io's myth folds into theirs like a river into a delta, broad, winding, layered with silted meaning. Historians still debate whether Io actually became Hathor, or whether the Greeks retrofitted the story to explain Egyptian beliefs. But what matters is this, then. Io is no longer running. She belongs. And when you sit beside her under the Egyptian sun, watching ibis birds stalk through reeds, and children sing her name, you realize something profound. This wasn't a punishment. It was a journey. Through humiliation, flight chaos, and near-constant insect harassment, Io has done what few mortals in Greek myth ever manage. She survived. She transcended. She became a god. And all it cost her was a few years of being a hoofed security concern. You stretch beneath the shade of a fig tree as the temple drums fade into the background. Io, yes, fully human again, stands quietly at the edge of a small courtyard surrounded by offerings. Papyrus scrolls, loaves of honeyed bread, painted amulets shaped like sacred cows. It's strange to think how far she's come from Argive priestess to confused cow to full-on living goddess. And she's not done yet. Because you see, in Greek myth, peace is rarely permanent. There's always a ripple, a sequel, a suspiciously timed prophecy. And sure enough, as Io's new life takes root in Egypt, whispers begin to rise with the Nile breeze. Not bad whispers, just fate nudging forward. A priest approaches her one evening with a voice like dry sand and tells her something she already half knows. She's pregnant. Now, you may remember back in her human days before Zeus panicked and turned her into a cow, they'd had a moment. A divine moment. One of those maybe don't mention this to Hera moments. And now, there's a child, a demigod on the way. You don't see Io panic. Not this time. Her hands don't shake. She just sighs, deeply, then smiles faintly. You can tell this isn't a burden to her. It's a thread, a continuation. She names him Epaphus the Touchborn, which frankly sounds like a line from a very expensive cologne ad, but it makes sense in the myth. Born of divine contact, marked by Olympus. When he's born, the Nile rises higher than it has in years. Coincidence? Maybe. But the people take it as a sign. They see Epaphus not just as a royal child, but as divine. A new dynasty anchored in both heaven and hooves. Io raises him herself. Yes, raises. Not vanishes into clouds or gets turned into a constellation or explodes into a philosophical metaphor. She stays. Teaches him how to walk the temple steps without tripping over his robes. How to offer prayers with both reverence and a healthy side of skepticism. She even teaches him quietly on soft desert nights how to swat away flies with maximum dignity. And yet even in this lull the myth stretches. Because Epaphus grows curious about Greece, about his mother's past, about the father he's only heard about in cryptic, half-muttered bedtime stories. And one day he asks, "Will I ever see where you came from?" Io doesn't answer at first. She just watches the river slide by. Then says maybe one day, but not yet. See, she knows how stories work. Too much return and you start the whole tragedy over again. Still, word of Epaphus spreads, not just in Egypt, but beyond. In Phoenician ports, sailors toast to his name and make up wildly incorrect songs about him. In distant Greek colonies, philosophers stroke their beards and wonder if he might unite East and West. Some even claim he'll found entire cities, dynasties, empires. Historians still argue whether this myth was meant to bridge cultural identities linking Greek and Egyptian traditions through a single mythic bloodline, or simply to give ancient storytellers an excuse to throw more geography into their scripts. Either way, the story works. And Io, she watches it all unfold, sometimes with pride, sometimes with weariness, always with the quiet, knowing look of someone who's run across multiple continents pursued by a weaponized insect. There's a moment just once when Zeus appears again. Not grandly, not with thunder, just steps out from behind a column while Io's inspecting temple renovations. He looks older, tired maybe. Less king of Olympus, more dad who hasn't been invited to the family barbecue in centuries. Io doesn't scream or kneel. She just crosses her arms and waits. Zeus says something about fate, about legacies, about how proud he is. She raises an eyebrow. He mutters something about needing to leave before Hera notices. And he's gone, just like that. You both stare at the space he vanished from. Then Io turns back to the renovation and mutters, he still doesn't know how to apologize. And just like that, the moment passes. The temple walls rise higher. Epaphus learns to debate priest astronomers about lunar calendars. And Io, she becomes myth in real time. Not as a victim, but as a mother, a goddess, a woman who endured. The locals begin telling a new version of her story. One where the cow isn't cursed but chosen, where every hoofprint marked a sacred trail, where the gadfly wasn't torment but a guide, a necessary push toward transformation. It's not accurate exactly, but it's beautiful, and sometimes that's enough. You rise early before even the ibis begin their awkward honking serenades. Io is already awake, seated near the edge of the temple's sacred pool, one foot trailing idly through the still water. Her hair's longer now, threaded with tiny golden beads. Her face has settled into something like peace. Not joy exactly, but contentment. Hard-earned. Wary. Strong. Epiphus is asleep in a chamber nearby, sprawled diagonally across his linen bedroll like he's trying to conquer corners in his dreams. He's older now, tall, curious, gifted with that impossible confidence children of gods tend to carry, like sandals that never quite fit. Io hums to herself. A lullaby from Argos, maybe? Or something half-remembered from when she still wore horns. But even peace like this doesn't last forever, because from the west, word arrives, a traveler comes, dusty, wide-eyed, muttering names that make Io stiffen. Names like Danaus, names like Belus. It seems the story is stretching backward again, looping, reaching for ancestors yet unborn. You listen carefully. The man says he saw a vision, a gleaming woman who crossed the sea as a cow who bore a son who would father a line of kings. The oracle told him to find her to carry her words east and tell her, the daughters must return. Io doesn't answer, but you watch her shoulders tense. You see, this is the start of something she had hoped wouldn't come. Because where Epiphus brings unity, these whispers bring legacy. And legacy in mythology is always complicated. The traveler leaves her with a sealed scroll. Inside, a genealogy. Names to remember, cities to claim. One bold prediction scratched in lapis ink. From your line shall come 50 daughters. Io frowns. Too many, she mutters. Still, the idea sticks. And you begin to understand Io's story, while it feels complete, is really only the preface to a saga that will ripple through generations. Through Danaus, her great-grandson. Through the Danaids, those 50 daughters destined for marriage rebellion, and one very messy family reunion that ends with 49 grooms not making it to dessert. But that's for later. Right now, you walk with Io through the temple grounds. She's quiet, reflective. At one point, she stops beneath a sycamore fig tree and sighs. You'd think after being chased across the world by a biting fly, the universe would give you a break. You smile. She smiles too. The Nile floods again that year, early, strong, generous. The people say it's her blessing. Crops rise taller. The cattle grow fat. The gods, it seems, are pleased. Or maybe they're just resting. Historians still argue whether the myth of Io as the ancestral mother of dynasties was retroactively fitted to explain the interconnected royal claims of Egyptian and Greek nobles. Others suggest she was a symbolic bridge between matriarchal and patriarchal structures. Either way, she becomes less a person and more a root system. You watch scribes chisel her story into limestone tablets, often wildly embellishing the details. One version has her flying over the sea on golden wings. Another insists the gadfly was actually a jealous nymph in disguise. And in at least 3 separate retellings, Hermes sings her back to humanity with a harp carved from moonlight and goat bones. Io reads these inscriptions and shakes her head. They never ask me for edits. Still, she allows it, because she understands now the point isn't perfect accuracy. It's endurance, legacy, survival through story. Sometimes you catch her looking to the horizon, toward Argos, toward the temple she once served before everything changed, toward the place where she last saw her family. And you wonder, does she want to go back? But she never says. Instead, she builds. A second shrine rises beside the first, shaped like a crescent horn. It's modest, but carved with love. Inside, the walls are painted with a mural of her journey hoofprints winding across blue sea and golden hills, chased by a comically exaggerated gadfly that looks more like a flying wine bottle with wings. Children giggle when they see it. They leave offerings, not grand ones, just little things. Woven flowers, smooth pebbles, clay cows with lopsided legs. Io kneels beside each one, smiles and whispers thanks. And then one day, Epiphus, now nearly grown, asks her something new. Can I leave? She freezes, not in fear, but in recognition. It's the same question she once asked silently with hooves with desperate eyes. And now it's his turn. She nods. You must, she says, but not to run, to plant. So he does. Epiphus sails north seeking new lands, new cities, new meanings to carve from the stories that trail behind his name. And I go. She watches him go, not with dread, with peace. Because this time the leaving isn't punishment, it's growth. The story continues, and she finally is no longer being dragged through it. She's writing it. The nights are cooler now. A breeze stirs through the papyrus reeds near the Nile, brushing past the temple stones with the softness of a whispered memory. You lie beside a fire pit that hasn't been used in weeks. The stars blink overhead like they know more than they're letting on. Io stands near the water, her arms wrapped loosely around herself. She's watching the river again, not because she expects something to rise from it. No gods, no omens, no cryptic messages carved into drifting lotus leaves. She just watches. Because that's what you do when you've been everything. A priestess, a cow, a mother, a goddess, and now a matriarch. Because Epaphus has begun writing. He sends scrolls from far-off cities, from Byblos, from Memphis, from a windswept port where merchants say they saw a stone altar to the cow queen of the western shore. He's founding temples of his own, making offerings in her name, telling the myth her myth with reverence and the occasional dramatic flourish involving lightning and tasteful nudity. Io rolls her eyes at that part. But she's proud, and not just of him, of the lineage he's creating, because from him will come Libya, a daughter, a land, a symbol, another continent to carry the thread forward. And from Libya, the lines blur into more stories, into Belus, into Agenor, into daughters and sons who will found cities, make gods weep, and probably marry their cousins, because this is Greek mythology and family trees are more like braids made of question marks. Still, Io plants olive trees in the courtyard. She trains vines to crawl up the stone pillars of her shrine. She carves her journey into the walls not in words but in tiny images, cow prints, waves, a buzzing fly with very dramatic eyes. Pilgrims arrive. Not many, not loud, but often. Women mostly. Tired-looking, strong-shouldered. They sit on the temple steps and rest their foreheads against the cool stone. They don't always speak, but when they do, the stories are strangely familiar. I was blamed for something that wasn't my fault. I had to leave everything behind. I didn't think I'd survive. Io listens. She always listens. Then she brings them water, honey cakes, and that steady, unwavering gaze that says, "You made it. You're here, and that's enough." She never mentions the gadfly anymore. But you do see her shoo the occasional mosquito like it owes her rent. One evening, a group of traveling poets camp near the shrine. They ask Io to tell her story. Not the version carved into temple walls, but the real one. With the mud and the salt and the parts no one turns into song. So she does. Quietly, slowly, with pauses. And you sit there listening, realizing something remarkable. She's funny. Not slapstick funny. Not barred at a banquet funny. But dry. Understated. She describes Hermes as Olympus's most well-dressed mosquito, and the whole fire circle loses it. She calls the gadfly a divine personal trainer in disguise, and she reenacts her cow escape from Argos by crawling on all fours while mooing in different regional accents. By the end of the night, the poets are in tears, some from laughter, some from awe. One of them leaves behind a clay tablet etched with a single phrase, "Strength wears many skins." Io places it near the shrine door. That night she dreams. You watch it unfold. She's back in Argos, but it's not quite right. The sky is too purple, the trees are too tall. Her reflection in the temple basin shows horns, then doesn't. She hears someone calling her name, not Epaphus, not Zeus, not even her own voice, but something older, wiser. She wakes before she can answer, but the dream lingers. The next morning she sends a message, not on parchment, just word of mouth, whispered to a merchant who tells a sailor who tells a priest who tells a boy collecting shells. The message is this: Io remembers. That's it. Simple, soft, but it spreads. And soon across the cities of Egypt and the scattered islands beyond, people begin speaking her name in a new way. Not just as the cow who suffered or the woman who ran, but as the one who came back. Historians still debate whether Eo's cult ever held real political power in Egypt, whether she was ever officially worshipped under the names Isis or Hathor, or if those were simply spiritual overlaps rewritten over time. But they agree on this much. Her story survived, and more than that, it grew. You sit beside her again as the sun sets. She's holding a small carved figure. It's her as a cow, but smiling, almost smug. She chuckles softly. "I might keep this one," she says. And she does. You find her on the rooftop. It's just past dusk and the sky is thick with stars. The kind of velvet black night that makes you feel like the gods are leaning in closer, elbowing each other to hear a good story. Io lies back on a stone bench, arms behind her head, staring upward. Not searching for signs or omens, just watching. Taking a break from being remembered. You sit beside her. She doesn't speak at first, but eventually with that dry lilt you've come to expect, she says, "You know they're going to turn me into a constellation at some point." You blink. "Really?" She shrugs. "Probably. They always do." It's like retirement for mythological figures. You laugh. So does she. It's oddly comforting, this idea that someone who's run through mud and myth might one day just float in the sky, reclining gently among the stars, while ancient astronomers point and go, "Ah, yes, that's the one with the really weird family." And indeed, she's not wrong. Because there is a constellation called Io in some later Roman interpretations, though it shifts and blends with other myths over time. A cow among stars, a sigh in the night sky. Most versions agree she deserved to be seen even from far away. But that's later. For now, she's still flesh and breath and wit. And she's beginning to realize something: myth isn't just what people remember. It's what people carry. Io is becoming part of that. A story passed not just through epic poetry or dusty scrolls, but through casual conversation. A mother reminding her daughter that even the goddess had rough days. A sailor praying for safe passage through waters once swum by the sacred cow. Even farmers, when bitten by a fly, mutter her name as a kind of mild curse, half annoyed, half reverent. By Eo's hooves, one shouts after dropping a pail. She'd find that hilarious. And she does, because the myth has softened now. No longer sharp with pain or urgency, just warm, rounded. Like the curve of the foon overhead, pilgrims begin bringing songs, low quiet ones, more lullaby than hymn. The melodies shift depending on who sings them. In Crete, they add claps. In Cyprus, it's a three-note hum. One woman from Thessaly sings entirely in whistles and still somehow brings people to tears. Io listens to every one. She hums along sometimes. You start to notice new things appearing around the shrine. Offerings in unfamiliar languages. Seashells tied with gold thread. A tiny statue of a woman holding both a shepherd's crook and a fly swatter, clearly made by someone with a sense of humor. She places it near the altar, just behind the smug little cow figure she's claimed as her mascot. And then one quiet morning, a stranger arrives. He's older, dressed plainly, carries a staff carved with unfamiliar markings. You don't know what he wants at first, but he walks straight to Io bows once, not too low, and says, "My people call you something different." She tilts her head. "We call you the one who walks through stories." Io smiles. "That's not bad." He stays for 3 days, tells her his people's version of her journey. In their telling, the cow shape was a blessing, an ancient protection given only to those who needed to survive something too big for their original form. The gadfly wasn't Hera's vengeance, but the voice of the wind pushing her toward where she was meant to bloom. Historians still argue whether this visitor was a real traveler or a narrative invention added by later storytellers to tie Io's myth into broader cultural threads. But to Io, it doesn't matter. She listens, thanks him, and adds his version to the wall etched beside the others under a tiny painted fly with unusually gentle wings. That evening, a child runs through the temple courtyard shouting, "She's telling the cow story again." 10 other children follow. They gather around Io, sprawled like sleepy cats, heads in laps, legs tangled, and she begins. This time she exaggerates the moos, adds voices to the flies, does a surprisingly good Hermes impression that involves a lisp and an obsession with winged footwear. The kids giggle, one falls asleep on her knee. You watch her wrap her arms around them all, her voice a gentle thread that winds through the pillars and into the evening air. This is immortality, not marble statues or celestial placement, but this, laughter, memory. The way someone falls asleep mid-story and still wakes up remembering the lesson. That you can be changed, chased, misunderstood, and still find your way home. You wake before dawn to the sound of sweeping. Io is brushing sand from the temple threshold with a palm-frond broom. Her movement slow and steady like she's performing a ritual older than memory. She hums as she works, not a hymn, not a lament, just a tune. Something halfway between a lullaby and a protest song. She's up early more often these days, not because she has to be, but because the silence before sunrise feels kind. She's changed again, not in the way of gods, no sudden wings or thunderclaps, but in the quieter mortal ways. Her posture has softened. Her gaze lingers longer on birdsong, on the curves of pottery, on how children race from one shady courtyard to the next, like their legs might outrun gravity. You walk with her past the lotus pool. She pauses, watches a frog plop into the water, then mutters, "Still better company than Hermes." She smiles, you laugh, and then she grows quiet again. You see, people have started asking her for decisions. Not just stories, but judgment. A merchant asks whether it's fair to trade woven linen for 10 bushels of barley instead of 8. A widow asks if she can remarry without offending her husband's ghost. A young temple girl asks if it's true that dreams sent by cows are sacred. Io listens to each one, carefully, like the gods used to forget to do. Then she answers gently in a tone that says, "This is not law, just love." You're not sure when it happened, but she's become something more than legend. She's become real. And not just to those who believe in the myth, to those who simply believe in her. A group of elders even asks if they can rename the street leading to her shrine. It used to be Path of Divine Smoke. Now they call it the Way of Hoofprints. She rolls her eyes but gives permission. And then, as if fates can't help themselves, the questions shift. People ask about Argos again, about her old life, about Hera, Zeus, the temple where it all began. Some bring news there are whispers in Greece that Io isn't just a myth anymore but a goddess who actually lives. A priest from Delphi claims to have seen her in a vision standing in sunlight, laughing beside a statue of herself. You look to Io wondering what she'll say, but she just shrugs. "I hope I looked good in the vision." Still, you catch her standing near the shoreline in the evening staring west. Not longingly, just measuring the distance. One afternoon a boat arrives. It's small, carved from dark wood. The sailor is alone, his accents thick, his skin weathered, and he bows not once but twice before handing over a scroll sealed with green wax. It's from Argos. Inside a letter, formal, flowery, the kind that clearly involved multiple people with too many opinions and not enough ink. But the message is clear. You are welcome home. Your temple awaits. Your people remember. Io reads it, folds it, places it in a jar of olives. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Some things preserve better when brined. Later that week, she receives a gift, a carved wooden box containing a tiny statue of herself. Not as a cow, but as a woman wrapped in linen holding a staff topped with a crescent moon. It's from a young sculptor in Delphi. He calls it Io the Still. She places it on the altar beside her favorite clay cow and the fly-swatting shepherdess. And you realize something: she's not resisting her past anymore. She's curating it, sifting through it like beach glass, keeping the pieces that shine, letting the sharp ones drift back into myth. Historians still argue whether Io's story was meant to end in Egypt at all. Some versions have her vanish into divine mist. Others claim she returned to Greece and faded into ancestor memory. A few even say she ascended into the stars with her son and watches the earth through bovine-shaped constellations. But here, she's real, visible, mortal-ish. And when a little girl runs up and asks her, "Were you really a cow?" she bends down, smiles, and says, "Yes," then leans in and adds, "And I made it look fabulous." You're beginning to lose track of time. Days blur gently into each other, marked not by battles or omens, but by harvest conversations and the slow, steady reshaping of myth into memory. You sit outside the temple with a handful of others peeling dates and listening to Io explain how to tell if a fly is judging you. Apparently, it's all in the wing angle. She's become a fixture here. Not grand, not untouchable, just present. People come for her stories, but they stay for her company. For the way she asks questions no one else does. For how she pauses before answering, like she's choosing her words not for effect but for gentleness. One morning, a scholar arrives from Miletus. Robes too long, sandals too loud, hair that screams, "I once debated a fig tree on the nature of time." He kneels before Io and begins a breathless explanation of her historical significance. He lists epithets she's never heard, draws her bloodline in the dirt with impressive confidence, claims her great-great-grandchildren will become queens of cities that don't exist yet. Io listens for 6 whole minutes before cutting in with, "Do any of those cities have good figs?" You can actually hear the scholar reboot, but he recovers, eventually, and thanks her for her time. Then he sets up camp nearby and spends the next week copying every inscription in the temple, even the badly drawn fly murals. Io peeks over his shoulder and offers commentary. "That's not how my tale looked. I had way more mud on me that day. That's supposed to be Zeus, num." No, absolutely not. You start to notice something else, too. The children who once came for stories now come with questions. Not about gods, about life, about how to say no without guilt, about how to keep going when everything stings, about how she knew she was strong enough to survive. Io never calls herself wise, but she answers. Sometimes with riddles, sometimes with jokes, sometimes with a silent touch to the shoulder that says, "You already know." And they listen, because she listens. One evening, a storm rolls in from the east. Rare this time of year. Winds stir the sand into dancing spirals. Palm trees bow. Thunder groans across the horizon like an old god waking from a nap. Most of the shrine's visitors retreat indoors. Not Io. She walks out into the courtyard, face tilted toward the sky, letting rain soak through her linen robes like it's a baptism. You join her, blinking through the downpour. She takes your hand. Then without warning, she moos, loudly, echoing off the stone walls. And then she laughs. You have to admit she says it's a better noise than thunder. You laugh too, because she's right. That night, after the storm passes, the air smells different. Sweeter. Like something's about to begin again. The river swells slightly, enough to bring new silt, new frogs, new reeds curling up from the bank. And somewhere in the distance you hear drums. Slow, steady. A rhythm not of war but of welcome. A small boat arrives the next morning. Not from Greece, but from Libya. The messenger brings news of Epaphras, of his daughter, of cities being named for her. One especially glows in the story: Memphis, a place of stone and river, of law and lineage, of priests who speak of the divine cow who became a woman, who became a goddess, who became the beginning. Io reads the message with her usual calm, then places it beside her jar of olives and smiles, not triumphantly, not even proudly, just peacefully, like someone hearing a favorite song from a long time ago and finding they still remember the words. Historians still argue whether Io's connection to Memphis is symbolic or genealogical, whether the myth was a tool of early Greek-Egyptian diplomacy or simply a way to anchor lineage through shared mythos. But none of that matters here, because you see it in her eyes. She knows the truth, not the one written, the one lived. She sits beneath the same fig tree you first found her under. Her feet are dusty, her fingers stained with pomegranate. Her smile, the quiet kind that stays long after the conversation ends. And she says to you almost as a whisper, "I never thought I'd love being remembered." Then after a pause, "But I like being known more." You wake in the middle of the night to a strange sound. Not thunder, not singing. It's humming, low and tuneless like someone thinking out loud without words. You wander quietly through the temple's moonlit halls and find Io seated on the floor of the inner sanctum, surrounded by a scattered ring of offerings. Tiny clay cows, dyed linens, pomegranate seeds, feathers, and a stick of half-burned incense that smells faintly like honey and rain. She's humming to a statue, not one of herself, one of her mother, a new carving recently installed. She asked for it to be simple, a woman kneeling, arms open, forehead pressed to the earth. This, she said, is how it started. You sit beside her. She doesn't stop humming. Eventually, she says, "They asked me to name a festival." You blink. "Did you?" She nods. "Called it the Day of Return." You smile. She doesn't elaborate, but you know what it means. The day she stepped onto unfamiliar shores, unsure if she'd ever stand upright again. The day she turned from fleeing to staying. And now, the people have begun to celebrate. They light candles in rows along the Nile, tracing her journey in soft glows that float downstream like fireflies with purpose. They carry lanterns shaped like cows, some elegant, some cartoonish, and leave jars of milk at crossroads with notes tucked underneath. For safe travels, for safe returns. The first time she saw one of those notes, she didn't speak for 10 minutes. Then she laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. "I was once a warning," she said. "Now I'm a blessing." How's that for rebranding? You're starting to see the myth bend around her. It's not just ancient anymore. It's active, living, shifting. Someone paints a mural near the market, Io, standing tall, not in fear but in defiance, surrounded by women in different stages of transformation. Some still hooved, some halfway human, all with eyes open looking forward. She sees it. Her lips part. But she doesn't cry, just nods. "They're getting it now," she says. "It was never about what I became. It was about what I kept." And what she kept more than anything was herself, her memory, her ability to choose. Even when it seemed like choice had been stripped from her by gods and gadflies and geography, she found slivers of agency, held onto them like olive pits, planted them quietly in the soil of her survival. And now, the branches are everywhere. You walk with her to the edge of town where the papyrus fields meet the marshes. There's a new stone marker there inscribed with a single line, "She walked far, but never disappeared." Historians still debate the authenticity of this phrase. Some claim it was added centuries later by reformist priests trying to reframe Io as a symbol of perseverance. Others believe it was her own phrase, dictated, not chiseled. Regardless, it becomes one of the most quoted lines in temple prayers and bedtime stories alike. Little girls repeat it before exams. Mothers whisper it while braiding hair. Sailors carve it into the wood of their boats. And Io, she just shakes her head and mutters, "I really should have charged royalties." Later that night, as stars shimmer in the inky sky, you hear music. Soft drums, flutes, a chorus of voices rising gently in rhythm. A group has gathered by the shrine. They're not formal priests, not temple-trained, just people, singing for her, with her, about her. The lyrics are simple, a list, really, of things that change and return. Rivers, birds, wind, women. Io walks out quietly, joins them without ceremony, and begins to sway not like a queen or a deity or a figure of awe, but like someone who knows the steps. You join her, because you've been walking alongside her long enough to know this was never a story of punishment. It was a story of persistence, not about escaping gods, but about becoming one, on your own terms. There's a new addition to the temple garden, a tree not native. Its roots struggle against the dry soil, but Io insists it will thrive. "It's a fig," she explains, "from the old grove near Argos. They sent a cutting with a caravan. Took 10 people to get it here without snapping the thing in half." You help her plant it. Carefully, she pats the soil with her palms, then leans back satisfied. "Now we'll see if homesickness grows fruit." The fig tree becomes a quiet companion to the shrine. It doesn't bloom much, not at first, but when it does, the fruit is small and sweet and somehow makes everything taste like memory. People begin to leave their own seeds beside it. Tiny bundles wrapped in cloth symbolizing stories they want to plant. Some write confessions on leaves. Others tie bits of hair of thread of past regrets to the branches and whisper wishes as if the tree understands. And maybe it does. You and Io watch it from the temple steps. She's quieter these days. Not sad, just more still. Like someone who's learned to leave silence open unfilled, letting it be its own kind of wisdom. I think I'm done being chased, she says one afternoon watching birds wheel above the water. You nod. She continues. It's funny. People think transformation is the end of a story, but really it's just the intermission. You look around, at the fig tree, at the fly mosaic that someone replaced with one made entirely of blue tiles. It sparkles now, Io had whispered, grinning, at the children painting hoof prints along the stone pathway for the upcoming festival of return. Yeah, this doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like something more permanent, like a landing. More travelers begin to arrive, ones you don't expect. A Spartan woman with calloused hands who carries a dagger shaped like a crescent moon. A blind sculptor from Thebes who touches the altar with reverence and leaves behind a perfectly smooth stone cow, no larger than a walnut. A scribe from Lesbos who composes a poem about Io entirely in questions 49 lines long. Io reads that poem 3 times. Then adds her own question to the last line. And what did you become when no one was watching? She inscribes it on the inside of the shrine door, just for those who enter. Historians still argue whether the cult of Io ever had official priestesses or whether the temple ran itself by collective memory and communal ritual. But archaeological fragments suggest a form of shared stewardship. A rotating group of women, none claiming authority, all claiming responsibility. And somehow that feels right. Because Io was never about dominance. She was about endurance. She hosts fewer story circles now. But when she does, they're quieter, deeper. She skips the jokes most of the time, except the one about the gadfly organizing a union. That one never gets old. One evening you find her in the archives, a small room tucked behind the shrine where scribes and visitors leave records, translations, versions of her story in other tongues. She's tracing her finger along a brittle parchment in Phoenician script, mumbling her way through the unfamiliar syllables. What does it say, you ask? She doesn't look up, just replies, I was the cow. I was the wind. I was the sea. She smiles. I like this one. You stay there a while, in the warmth of oil lamps. In the scent of ink and papyrus and the faintest hint of fig, it occurs to you that this might be the only myth that rests, not ends, not explodes, just exhales. And that's when she speaks again, soft, almost dreamlike. Someday, people will forget the shape of me. Whether I had horns, whether I cried or screamed or begged, but I hope they remember this. She presses her hand to her chest, then reaches for yours. You don't speak. You don't need to. You just sit together, 2 silhouettes beneath a sky that remembers everything. The fig tree bears fruit again. This time, there's no ceremony, no festival, no songs composed in Io's honor. Just a quiet morning where the dew clings to the leaves and the first ripe fig drops gently into her hand. She breaks it open, inspects the insides like a fortune teller reading seeds instead of stars, then eats it without a word. It tastes like return. Like silence held long enough to turn sweet. You walk with her to the river one last time. Not because anything's ending, just because the water feels different today. Slower, surer. Along the banks, new reeds have grown. The shrine has expanded 3 new rooms added by traveling stonemasons who didn't even ask for payment. We just wanted to be part of it, they said. Part of... what the canas? George, what exactly? Even Io doesn't answer that anymore. But the place knows. The air knows. And the soft glow of evening settling over the Nile knows too. She lets her feet sink into the mud, lets the water creep up around her ankles. She turns to you, brushing a fly from her cheek, not in fear, not in reflex, just casually, like it's part of life. And it is now. You know, she says, I used to think the gods were always watching. She squints into the sun. But I don't think they were. I think they glanced and then wandered off. And the rest? That was me. She picks up a stone, smooth, round, tosses it lightly and catches it again. I ran. I fought. I moaned like an idiot. I let a tree talk me into crying, but I also survived. She skips the stone across the surface. 1, 2, 3 ripples. And now I get to choose who I am without being asked first. That perhaps is the quietest revolution of all. The story of Ao has always been told in movements, transformation, escape, wandering endurance. But the final one, the one barely whispered in scrolls and frescoes, is this: stillness. Not stagnation, stillness. The kind where you finally get to look around and say, this is where I stay. Not because I'm stuck, but because I want to. Pilgrims still arrive. They still ask questions, still leave offerings, some meaningful, some deeply odd. One day, someone leaves a perfectly carved cheese shaped like a cow hoof. Io accepts it graciously and suggests they learn carpentry instead. A temple cat has adopted the altar as its nap zone. She calls it Argus, not for the old hundred-eyed watchman, but because it never blinks while watching fish. There are more children now, more laughter, more stories painted on the walls, some accurate, some embellished, all loved. And in the center of it all is Io. Not the cow, not the chased, not the punished. Just Io. Warm hands, steady voice. A smile that waits until you really deserve it. She's not trying to explain herself anymore. She's letting the myth go, letting the river carry it downstream into a world that will reshape it again and again. Maybe the cow becomes a constellation. Maybe the gadfly becomes a holy messenger. Maybe Zeus gets edited out entirely by some bard who finally asks, wait, why was he in this story? Io doesn't mind, because she knows what's real. You stand with her one last time at the temple entrance. The wind kicks up a little dust. Somewhere behind you, someone's singing off-key. And Io turns to you, takes your hand and says, go tell it wrong if you have to. Just don't forget, I kept walking. You nod. You will. And so will everyone else. Even in the wrong versions, even in the silence. Because she's not a goddess of perfection. She's the goddess of surviving what you were never meant to bear and laughing anyway. The air cools now. The sun slips gently behind the horizon, leaving the shrine awash in amber and lilac. The river quiets to a hush. And Io goddess Mother Wanderer Cow returns to her bench beneath the fig tree. She leans back, eyes soft, hands folded loosely in her lap. You feel the whole world settle, like a long breath released after being held too long. There are no more flies, no more storms, only the sound of reeds brushing against each other and the distant splash of a fish breaking the surface just once before sinking again into stillness. You close your eyes, let the warmth of the story wrap around you like a woolen cloak, softened by years of memory. You see hoofprints where there once was confusion. You hear laughter where there once was chase. And you feel gently the weight of centuries lifting, not gone, but easier to carry. Because someone else carried them first. Io walks no more. She rests. And maybe now so can you.